There is a coordinate in the high Andes where the laws of physics do not simply bend, they apologize. We are taught that history is a linear progression of cause and effect. But in the thin, oxygen-starved air of the Chilean-Argentine border, there exists a scar in reality that suggests otherwise. They called it Site 333, though in the frantic, handwritten notes of the early Soviet observers, it was known as the Void of the Fallen Cross. Imagine a mountain that breathes. Not metaphorically, but a geological mass that emits a rhythmic, subsonic pulse, a heartbeat that can be felt in the marrow of your bones before it is ever registered by a microphone. By the winter of 1946, the world was supposedly at peace. But while the ink was drying on the treaties of Europe, a silent exodus was occurring. High-ranking officers of the defeated Reich, men who had spent years chasing the occult and the hyper-technological, weren't just fleeing justice. They were fleeing toward a promise. They brought with them crates that were never manifested and scientists who had officially died in the firestorms of Berlin. They were headed for a specific altitude, to a place where the stars seemed closer than they should be. Before we descend further into this shadow history, I must ask you, if the weight of this investigation resonates with your own search for the truth, consider anchoring yourself to this channel. Subscribe and leave a like. It is the only way we ensure these frequencies continue to reach those who are actually listening. The first anomaly wasn't a sighting, it was a disappearance. In January 1947, a Chilean border patrol, 12 seasoned men, vanished near the shadow of Mount Aconcagua. When their camp was found 3 days later, the tents were standing, the coffee was still in the pots, but the snow around the site was vitrified. It had been turned into glass, not by fire, but by a localized surge of electromagnetic energy so intense it had rearranged the molecular structure of the Earth itself. There were no footprints leading away, only a single, lingering scent of ozone and the sound of static coming from a radio that was no longer connected to a battery. This was the prologue to the legend of Base 211, a facility that wasn't built into the mountain so much as it was grown within it. As American and Soviet intelligence began to cross-reference their data, they realized they weren't looking for a bunker. They were looking for an engine. An engine the size of a city, buried beneath 2 miles of granite, operating on a logic that defied every textbook in Washington or Moscow. By 1948, the Cold War had a secret front that no map would ever show. The United States and the Soviet Union were no longer just hunting for Nazi scientists. They were hunting for the source of a signal that was melting their radar arrays. Reports from the Andes spoke of ghost lights, silver disks that moved with a physics-defying inertia, carving silent arcs across the southern stars. It wasn't just technology they feared. It was the realization that the German engineers who had fled to Argentina and Chile weren't just hiding. They were collaborating. Imagine the tension. In a world divided by ideology, two mortal enemies, Washington and Moscow, found themselves staring at the same terrifying data. Their reconnaissance planes were falling out of the sky, not from missiles, but from total electronic heart failure. Pilots who survived reported a thickening of the air, a crushing mental weight that made them forget their own names as they approached the coordinates of what the Americans now called Sector 211. This was the birth of the Phoenix Protocol, a pact of silence.
A joint task force led by two men who should have been rivals, the American electromagnetic specialist Dr. William Maxwell and the Soviet technical colonel, Viktor Morozov. They met in a windowless room in Zurich, looking at a single, blurred aerial photograph. It showed a mountain peak that had been surgically opened, not blasted, but dissolved, revealing a geometric structure of a material that reflected no light. Morozov leaned across the table and whispered a single sentence that would haunt Maxwell for the rest of his life. "It is not a bunker, William. It is a door, and something from the other side is currently holding the handle." The protocol was clear: deep probing without official fingerprints. They weren't there to destroy it. They were there to understand the non-human factor that the defecting engineer, Heinz Kruger, had raved about before his accidental death in a Buenos Aires hotel. Kruger's final notes described a trade. The Reich hadn't discovered this place. They had been invited. In exchange for raw materials and biological access, they were given the blueprints for a new world, a world of zero-point energy and gravity manipulation. But as Maxwell and Morozov's team began their secret ascent into the high Cordillera, they realized the trade was far from equal. The mountain wasn't just consuming energy, it was beginning to broadcast. A rhythmic, mathematical pulse that was rewriting the radio frequencies of the entire southern hemisphere. The year 1950 marked the moment the anomaly became a reality. While the world was focused on the burgeoning conflict in Korea, a different kind of war was being waged in the silent peaks of the Andes. Under the top-secret Project Catalyst, American physicist William Maxwell began to peel back the first layer of the mountain's skin.
He wasn't looking for a radio frequency. He was looking for a pattern, and he found it. Deep within the granite, a structured, modulated sequence of pulses began to hum. A logic so dense, so alien, that it bypassed every known terrestrial encoding. It was non-human mathematics. Maxwell's analysis in Washington revealed that these signals weren't just data. They were a textbook of impossible physics. They described the transformation of matter and energy with an efficiency that made the nuclear reactors of the time look like steam engines. While Maxwell was deciphering the speech of the mountain, the Soviets were looking at its actions. In a parallel maneuver known as Operation Polis, a special forces group led by Major Dmitry Kovalyov achieved the unthinkable. One night, under a moonless Andean sky, the mountain itself seemed to exhale. A disc-shaped craft, glowing with a soft, rhythmic blue light, emerged silently from a concealed aperture. It didn't fly, it simply rearranged its position in space. It executed a vertical ascent and vanished into the stratosphere at a speed that left no heat signature, no sonic boom, only a terrifying silence. This was the turning point. The combination of Maxwell's non-terrestrial formulas and Kovalyov's visual confirmation changed the nature of the threat. Base 211 was no longer just a Nazi hideout. It was a hybrid bridge. The Phoenix Protocol was forced into its most dangerous phase: physical infiltration. Maxwell and the Soviet Colonel Morozov realized they couldn't just watch from the outside anymore. They had to see the engine for themselves, even if it meant walking into the jaws of a civilization that viewed humanity as little more than a resource.
They began to deploy seismic and magnetometric sensors that revealed a subterranean complex stretching hundreds of meters into the Earth's crust. The energy consumption of this site was off the charts. It was generating its own power through a process that defied the laws of thermodynamics. But the most chilling confirmation came from the shadows of the past. A defecting engineer, Heinz Kruger,
finally broke his silence before his death. He admitted that the Germans hadn't just built a base, they had constructed a joint laboratory with a non-human factor that had provided the blueprints in exchange for access to the Earth's heavy elements. The door was open, and the invitation was already signed in blood. In 1953, the Phoenix Protocol moved from observation to violation. Using a natural but suspiciously expanded fissure, the joint team breached the side section of the mountain. What they found inside was not a military installation, but a temple of cold, mathematical logic. The air was saturated with a low-frequency hum, and the corridors were bathed in a rhythmic, pulsing light that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. There was no dust, no sound of footsteps, only a silence so absolute it felt like a physical weight. When they reached the central hangar, the reality of their situation became terrifyingly clear. Suspended in the air, without a single support or cable, hung a massive disc-shaped craft, significantly larger than anything seen by Kovalyov or the radar operators. It was a seamless entity of matte, unknown material. Around it, people in unmarked coveralls worked with a coordination that was disturbing. They didn't speak. They didn't look up. Their movements were devoid of emotion, like biological components of a larger machine. Doctor.
Maxwell realized that the craft had no cockpit, no traditional controls, and no engine in any sense humanity understood. It was a manifestation of a physics that manipulated the space-time field itself, powered by a mass conversion process that rendered our nuclear theories obsolete. But the most chilling revelation came from the reports of the defecting engineer, Kruger. This wasn't a research lab. It was a harvesting station. The non-human factor wasn't here to share technology. They were here for specific heavy elements and biological samples. The disappearances in the Andes weren't accidents, they were collections. Sector 211 was a point of resource extraction, and we were simply the local wildlife. For the next 2 decades, from the 1960s into the 80s, the world's superpowers transitioned into a state of Operation Sword, a desperate defensive isolation. They couldn't attack, so they watched. Every 112 days, with a precision that aligned with specific astronomical coordinates, the craft, designated Target Omega, would depart and return. Any attempt to interfere was met with brutal efficiency. In 1967, a Soviet observation post that drew too close was neutralized not by bullets, but by a focused beam of high-frequency radiation that left the staff with internal burns no doctor could explain. Then came the Altair glitch of 1972. Target Omega didn't return. For 3 months, the mountain went radio silent, a void in the electromagnetic spectrum so profound it felt as if the facility had simply ceased to exist. When the activity finally resumed, the cycle had changed to 96 days. The mountain had repaired itself. Or perhaps the masters of Base 211 had simply updated their schedule. By the late 1970s, the desperation of the Phoenix Protocol reached its zenith. The powers that be realized they couldn't just watch the mountain forever. They had to try and lock the door.
In 1978, a final aggressive gambit was launched, Operation Shield. The plan was to use scalar generators, a synthesis of captured German designs and Maxwell's new physics, to create an electromagnetic curtain that would resonate with the base's own energy fields. But when the system was activated in 1981, the mountain didn't just resist, it answered. A massive energy surge erupted from the depths, triggering ball lightning and a total electromagnetic pulse that fried every observation post within 50 miles. Target Omega simply rose through the interference as if it weren't there. It was a humiliating realization. Our advanced weaponry was nothing more than a child's toy to them. Operation Shield was abandoned immediately. The authorities finally understood that a physical conflict meant certain defeat. Then came the 1990s. The collapse of the Soviet Union threatened to shatter the silence, as funding for the secret Operation Sword vanished overnight. The secret was leaking. In 1994, a last-ditch effort was made, not to conquer, but to hibernate the site. A precisely timed radio frequency pulse was aimed at the facility's heart during its peak power cycle. The result was an absolute collapse of activity. No explosion, just a single, terrifying infrasonic thud that shook the Andes to their roots, followed by a silence so profound it felt like the world had stopped spinning. The gates were found to be fused shut from the inside, sealed by a process we cannot reverse. Target Omega, which had been in flight, never returned. Today, the site remains a dead zone of low-gravity anomalies and distorted time. To keep the curious away, the International Committee on Anomalous Zones flooded the world with disinformation, mixing the truth with wild tales of Nazi moon bases and ancient aliens so that the real history would be buried under a mountain of ridicule.
Base 211 is still there. It isn't gone, it is simply waiting for the next cycle to begin.
If this journey into the shadows of our history has moved you, please consider that your support is what keeps these archives open. Subscribe and leave a like. It is the greatest way to ensure that the truth, however strange, continues to be told. And tell us in the comments, do you believe the door is truly locked? Or are we just living in the silence before the next exhale? Thank you for listening.